One thing a lot of guitar players need is the ability to give themselves a little volume boost in some of their presets, whether that be to make a guitar solo kind of sit above the mix a bit when playing live or to accentuate an important part in a song. I've had a lot of questions about this, and one very recently after I did my video talking about my use of the LA Studio Comp at the end of the chain, and I've seen a lot of people suggest things that may not be the best way to go about achieving a good solo boost. So today I'm going to talk about the different situations we may run across and give you the way that's going to be the most successful way to do this for your particular situation. So here we are over in HX Edit, and I have a little preset that I threw together very quickly based off of the template that I use all the time. I have a Placator Dirty amp with a few little tweaks I made. I have a 412 greenback 25 stock cab with a 121 ribbon at 4 inches back. I have the normal low and high shelf EQ I put in, transistor tape, room reverb, parametric EQ there just if I need it, and I have my LA Studio Comp, which is going to actually be a very important part of our discussion today. So a lot of folks will say, well, how can we get a good solo volume boost if we need to kind of boost up our sound a little bit in volume? And a lot of folks go right to the amp block, and this could be a good way to do it, really depending on the situation and what we're trying to achieve. Now, one word of advice is if you are going to do it here, please do not use the drive or master controls. I've seen this as something that's been thrown out by a lot of folks. If we raise the master, we are also altering the tone. This is going to be pushing the virtual power tubes harder, and we'll start to break up the sound of the amp more, as well as if we push the drive control, which would be like pushing sort of the virtual preamp tubes, which will give us more saturation and distortion. So the only control that's really going to work for this would be our channel volume. So what are some ways we can accomplish this? Well, we could accomplish this with snapshots. I could do something like simply come back to snapshot 1, right click on this, engage snapshots, move to snapshot 2, and then boost this up to 10. Now what's going to happen when I switch between snapshots, it's going to give me that little volume boost that I need or want. Another way we could do this, though, is simply by assigning this to a foot switch. I could say I'm going to assign this to foot switch number 7, go to my bypass controller, assign tab, hit that parameter and say, the minimum setting I want is at 8 and the maximum is at 10. Now, when I go and hit this switch on my Helix, you'll notice that bounces between the 8 and the 10, giving us that little boost of volume. Now, a lot of folks might say, there, done, perfect, excellent. And it may truly be as simple as that in a particular situation. The only problem is that it can be more complicated than that depending on our situation and how our preset is built. There are many, many places that we can boost and cut the level of our preset within a signal chain. As we discussed, the channel volume can be used on the amp. If we go to our stock cab block, we could use the final level control, much like we can on our low and high shelf. We have a level control on our transistor tape. We have a level control on our reverb. We have a level control on our parametric EQ and also a level control on our LA Studio Comp. These are the final output levels of each of those blocks. Now, depending on where we decide to boost or cut the signal, it could potentially affect the way that a block after it reacts. What are some examples of that? Well, let's take the compressor at the end. If I decide to even boost the final output level of, let's say, the parametric EQ, that is going to send more signal into the compressor, and it's going to add more compression, which may or may not be something we want. If it is something you want, then perfect, you have no problem. But we should at least be aware that it is doing that. So much like going to the channel volume on the amp and boosting, well, if we have a compressor somewhere in the chain after that, boosting before the compressor is going to affect the sound of that compressor. So we need to be mindful of that. And so the most important thing to remember is wherever we decide to boost our level in the signal, we have to be aware of how it's going to affect the blocks that come after that boost or cut point. One good example of this is what I see a lot of folks do. They will come before an amp and they'll put a simple gain block, let's say, and let's do what we were doing a moment ago. We'll assign that to foot switch 7. And maybe we'll have the minimum setting on that at 0. And let's put the maximum up at 7. It's a pretty extreme boost, but let's see here. So now when I hit that button, I go from 0 to 7. So let's start at the 0 point and listen to the tone, and then we'll jump it up to 7, and you might be surprised at what the outcome of this is. Does that surprise anybody? Some folks might have been expecting a big volume jump, but we really didn't get much of a volume jump at all. What we did do is hit the front of the amp harder, and the amp saturated more. It was slightly more distorted and probably a little more compressed sounding. We may have got a little more sustain out of it, but we really didn't get that sort of clean boost in volume. And that's because we're boosting in front of the amp. The amp is a non-linear block. It's going to react differently depending on how much signal it's hit. In this case, it's going to saturate more, maybe give us more sustain. But if our point is to get more volume out of it, that really wouldn't be an appropriate way to do it. But what happens if I just simply slide that volume block after the amp block? Now let's listen to what happens. We now get what would be more expected, which is the boost in volume. But the other problem with that is we still have a compressor at the end here. So here's what's interesting. If I go to my compressor block and play a little bit, I notice that I get about 1.5 dB to 2 dB of compression, exactly as I dialed this in. That was the sound I wanted. But when I come over now, boost this up 7 dB, come back to my compressor block, I'm getting far more compression than I dialed in before. And again, if you like that and are aware that it's happening and are happy with that situation, then there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of folks aren't aware that now we've hit the front of that compressor harder and it's not going to be reacting the same way as when I dialed it in with the setting at 0 dB. So a simple solution to that would be to take this gain block and slide it all the way down after the compressor. So now what you're going to hear here is the true sort of clean volume boost from 0 to the plus 7 dB. It's placed after the compressor, so it's not going to affect the amount of compression. In fact, it's the last thing in the chain. Therefore, it's not going to affect anything in the chain other than taking the existing sound of our preset and making it louder. And you'll see now we didn't change the feel of the preset by altering the compression, but we did get a nice volume boost. Now that brings up another interesting point. Do we really even need this gain block? Well, let's get rid of that. We'll come to our LA Studio comp at the end here. Could I not just go to the level control here, which is the final sort of output level of this particular block? Right click that, assign that to foot switch 7 and make the same settings. Minimum setting of 0, maximum of plus 7. Now when I hit that same foot switch, you'll notice that the final output of the LA Studio comp will jump from 0 to plus 7, giving us that same boost. Without altering how much gain reduction and compression we get out of the compressor. Now, again, we could also say, well, there's another option. We could come to the final output block and do the same thing. I could set that to foot switch 7, select that parameter, and again, do those same settings, 0, plus 7. Now when I come and hit this foot switch, my final output block is going to bounce between 0 and plus 7. And in no way, shape, or form will that affect anything in the sound or feel of the preset because it's the final output block where I would adjust that from. So what's the takeaway from all of this? Well, the takeaway is that there is a lot of options for applying a boost to our volume in the signal chain, but depending on the complexity of our signal chain or our preset, and depending on what results we're looking for, there are going to be more appropriate places to potentially boost or cut our level. So again, if we throw a gain block in front of an amplifier, we're likely not going to get the volume boost we thought we were. We will very likely break up the amplifier so it distorts more or saturates more. If we add level before a compressor, we're going to affect the way that that compressor compresses, and maybe we won't get the results we want. So if we're looking for just a simple, clean volume boost of a preset we like the sound of we can go to our final block, go to its final level, we can make our boost there. We could add a gain block after our final block in our signal chain if we prefer to work that way and do the boost there. Or we could just simply go to our final output block and do the boosts and cuts there. It really depends on the situation and the circumstance. So I'm hoping that with those tips, that'll clear up a lot of the misconceptions that some folks have about the best way to do a clean sort of solo boost if we need to just get more volume out of our preset. And I really hope that that goes a long way in helping you to be able to accomplish what you want with your preset and maybe spark some new ideas for you as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it, and also subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I will be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.